Here we go. Happy Friday, April 17th. This is the CAPZ meeting, so welcome. If you're a new member, do you want to go ahead and just say what your name is, why you're here? So a little intro. Do we have any new members today?
Hi, this is Yuvraj. So basically, I'm working with Nirmata and we are building a cluster API provider. That's why I'm here to understand how CAPZ is working.
Awesome, welcome. Anybody else? All right, we will continue. So we have a Google Doc. If you just want to like jot your name down if you're here, I'll put it in the chat. And also we need a note taker. Does anyone want to volunteer for today?
I'm happy to.
Okay. It's like, are we gonna get someone else?
I was going to volunteer this guy.
Oh, I'm sure he would be the greatest note taker.
He has paws on keyboard.
Alrighty, thank you, David. Appreciate it. All right, so now we're just gonna go through the list. We'll do our open discussion and we'll answer open questions. And the last maybe 5 to 10 minutes, we can go through our project board and just make sure it's up to date. But really want to spend time on talking about new things that are coming up in the CAPZ project. So let's start with Cecile. Go ahead with your patch release and then conformance testing.
So I don't see Steven here, so I was hoping he'd be here. Maybe we could circle back on this, but
Okay.
just wanted to give a heads up that I think we should cut a new patch release because we fixed a bug. There wasn't any allowed UDP traffic on the load balancer, which was causing time sync to not work. So we fixed that. It's in master, but I think we should release it because it's pretty important. So I can cut the release, but just wanted to see if anyone had anything that they want to also put in there that isn't in master right now, or if there were any objections to that. I don't think it's very controversial, but just in case. And thank you, Justin, for finding that bug, by the way.
Oh yeah. What ended up being the issue that blocked it from being able to connect those IPs?
So it actually reaches out to NCP on UDP port 123. And the standard load balancers in Azure, they don't have outbound traffic by default. You have to enable that. And we had an outbound role for TCP traffic, but not for UDP.
I see. That makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense, but it's what it is. It works out now, so.
Thanks. And sorry about saying the ping would work. I did another test and somehow it worked, and so.
Yeah, it's not super obvious / it doesn't really make sense. But yeah, the docs on standard load balancer are actually pretty well written, so I think those help me a lot when how they work. Any questions on that? No. All right. If not, I think I also have the next one. So I've been iterating on conformance testing in the past week or two, and fixed a few things that were causing some of the test cases to fail, and I added a periodic job to Prow. The periodic job is failing. The last one failed because there was still a last thing that went into master this morning that was required for it to run. But I was able to test on a PR by adding a pull request, a pre-submit job that's completely optional and not run by default. And the last run of that test yesterday completely passed, except that we had a timeout before the cleanup, so I had to increase the timeout afterwards, but the test suite passed completely. So that's really good news. I look forward to having more data over time, like having to see if it's consistently passing or if it's flaky or kind of thing. But yeah, so just wanted to give a heads up on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for doing that. Alrighty, next thing, update from Nader.
Yeah, I wrote that. Nader
Okay,
he just told me that was his update, so I wrote it down. But,
gotcha. David, do you want to explain the update? Is this you, David? That
David Justice, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I was just catching up.
Yeah, no problem.
Can't
Okay, all
talk
right,
and take
cool.
notes at the same time? Jeez.
You know, if you want the notes to look like what I'm saying. All right, cool. So flavor creation. So in cluster cuddle, you can say cluster cuddle config and drop out a different flavor of a cluster based on a template within your templates directory for your provider or in the release artifact. So we only had one template in there up till now, and that's our cluster template.yaml under the templates directory. What the PR that's open, I forget what the PR is. Let me find the number real quick. So it's PR 540. I'll drop that into the chat. Oh, it's there. Thanks. Anyway, PR 540 goes through and creates kind of an opinionated directory structure where we have under templates, we have a flavors directory. And that flavors directory, any directory within there other than base will turn into a flavor. So basically, it's just a customize directory, and we'll run customize on it and drop a flavor with the name of the directory. Try to make it pretty simple. So if you want to create a new flavor, maybe a derivation of another flavor with just some patches on it, it becomes really simple. And that PR has an example of transforming external Kubernetes provider, cloud provider into a flavor. So yeah, if you take a look at it, we'd love to get some feedback on it. If it's good, bad, and different, if there's another way to do it. So any questions? Thanks, Cecile. All right. If there are no questions, I will continue into machine pool. Okay. Machine pool, there are very little updates. This week ended up getting taken up by little things to get to make machine pools easier to use. So part of that was the next thing we'll talk about, and the other part is having a easy template to deploy a machine pool cluster. What else? So the next one is Tilt development flow updates.
Just
So,
one about machine.
yeah.
Do you think the PR is ready for initial review or not yet?
No, let me get, I need to get, I want to make sure that it's end to end. So I need to spin up the VMSS and make sure that nodes are joined now. I haven't updated it from master in a little bit. So let me do that today. I will mark it as no longer WIP and start to get reviews in place. Still have a hold on it though.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, cool. Any questions on that?
If you run into any issues and would like to pair on that, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom and hack.
I am super happy to hear that. Thank you, Justin. I will possibly take you up on that. and reflect that likewise. If you're hacking on something, please don't hesitate to reach out. Also, I think Cecile, anybody else working on it, we're totally open to that. That's fun. That's goodness.
Awesome. Great.
Awesome. So the next one, do we want to move on, or are there any other questions on the machine pool? All right, so next one, Tilt. Has anybody in here been using the Tilt configuration from CAPZ proper to do their dev? Yeah. All right. So when I thought I wanted to learn about tilt, so I wanted to go and spin up the tilt dev because I heard that it makes it so much easier and so much faster to dev the controller. And I followed through with the instructions that were there, and they did work. It's just it killed my machine. So when Tilt fired up from Cluster API, you have the provider directory next to it. It builds out all of the components needed for Cluster API through Docker, and then it builds all of the components for Cluster API or for CAPZ. So you end up having like kubeadmin controller. You have like all the different controllers for Cluster API plus your provider and whatever other providers you want. So that's actually quite a bit for a little laptop to take on. So what I ended up doing is we threw out there a tilt file for CAPZ individually. So what it does is it grabs down the version of Cluster API, loads it into the cluster, and then just only deploys out CAPZ. So it only builds and deploys CAPZ iteratively. This reduces quite a bit of the load on your computer, and it should help when developing and have a tighter inner loop. Cool. Thanks. Any questions? Oh, how do you use it? So all you have to do is run make tilt up. If you have kind on your machine, you should be good to go. And it'll go and build a kind cluster with a local registry, and then it will use tilt to deploy out to that kind cluster, and you should have a working dev environment. If you run into problems, please feel free to ping me, open an issue. Cool. If there's any questions?
Are there any instructions in the repo or docs on it? I know the answer, but.
That's a great question. Yes. So if you go to the developer setup, you'll see two options for setting up tilt. And option one leads you down the CAPZ approach, where you're developing a feature that's only for CAPZ, and that's a really great reason to use that, just the tilt file in CAPZ. But if you're going to create a feature that spans both CAPI and CAPZ, then you probably want to use the other one. But they're in the docs. You can look it up and kind of see which one you fit into. And it's not either or. You can do one and then change and say you want to do the other, and it should just work. Thanks, Cecile.
All right, thank you, David. Any other questions or comments or things people want to talk about? I have something that I would like to talk about, actually. But I'll wait to see if anybody else has something.
Go for it.
Okay, let's do it. So Cecile linked this yesterday, and I thought it was really interesting. So allowing existing Kubernetes clusters to join a management cluster. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that and kind of like what use cases, if we were to do this, what things could we knock out first and what things would maybe be harder? Because I think this is a really, really good story for folks to like move on to CAPZ. A lot of people already have lots of Kubernetes clusters, and I think that's really the user base of CAPZ is folks that already know Kubernetes and are already running Kubernetes. I don't think we might get some first-time Kubernetes users, but I think that's going to be way smaller. Since this is an open source project, I feel like new people usually land somewhere else rather than like a specific open source project. So for that, like I do think this feature would be really useful. But I guess my question is like, would this only be provider specific? And then I guess my next question would be like, how hard would it be to make sure that your management cluster could connect out to workload clusters that are in other environments? Does that even make sense for example? Like, would you want a workload cluster to span multiple environments or multiple providers, or would you want one workload cluster per provider? I don't know if this has been talked about in CAPI yet. I'm sure it
Yes.
has.
Yes is the short version. It's
Cool.
kind of the model that we're building off of internally for VMware. So absolutely. I think
Yeah.
it depends on what you want to do. We could talk about smaller. Hey, cat, stop it. We could talk about smaller use cases first, where it's same environment to same environment,
Yeah.
as opposed to or rather like let's say same provider, same VNet, like the clusters are close by. But
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately the point of the management cluster is to be able to connect disparate
Yeah.
clusters across the
Cool.
board.
So do you think that goal will change then in CAPI overall? Like, we'll remove that as a non-goal and move it to a goal?
Is it a non-goal now? I don't think it's a non-goal. Like internally,
Oh, okay.
that's
Gotcha.
something that we're
I
focused on.
think
So
he said that it's explicitly mentioned in the non-goals that so one of the non-goals is to manage non-cluster API provision Kubernetes conformant clusters. So like if you've already provisioned the cluster API, it's a non-goal for cluster API to figure out how to join that back. It's only for new clusters created.
I feel like this should be a good topic for the CAPI meeting.
for CAPI, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause it's
Yeah, I would
definitely
love to bring it to CAPI.
Yeah, I think figuring out like what our baseline for accepting a cluster into under management would be part of it.
Yeah. I think a good first step is figuring out how to just within the provider, as you said, like if they're within the same VNet or within the same cloud, for example, like that's probably easier. But like, how much harder, I guess, is my question of, I just, how much harder would it be to also join like a GCP cluster to a management cluster? Would it, like, if it's
Exactly.
already created, like, would it be that hard? But I guess like some of the life cycle things, like we would maybe have to pull from the GCP provider. Like, I don't know how that would work for a management cluster. I'm just like thinking of but yeah, anyone have thoughts about that? Like in terms of like how difficult it would be for the mixed mode clusters, and even for the cluster that's like within Azure, a workload cluster that's already created, say within AKS, or even within AKS engine. Like how hard would that be to join to an already created management cluster?
Stephen, so I haven't done this yet, but the pivoting of a workload cluster to become a management cluster, how does that work? Does the initial workload cluster that becomes the management cluster then manage itself?
Yeah.
So would this maybe fit into that same kind of workflow?
Bucket of transforming a cluster into I mean it that sounds feasible. I know that there are some things that have changed with Pivot since I've last looked at it, but essentially the initial idea is that you lay down I guess this is a long time ago now, but you lay down an initial local cluster and then you essentially ship the spec of the clusters under management out to one of the clusters that it just provisioned, or one of the nodes that it just provisioned, right? So yeah, I mean, I think if we care about this, the first focus would be homogeneous clusters as much as possible. So same provider, similar specs, right? And locality would matter too, I think. And then expanding out to other use cases. But I do think it's something that we should look at in the upstream cluster API meetings.
The way, so I've looked at cluster cuddle move recently. That's the one that moves the management to another cluster. And so what it does right now is it takes it's two steps. There's a cluster cuddle init on the workload cluster so that it becomes cluster API management cluster. and then it moves all the CRDs. But that assumes that the CRD or not the CRDs, but the resources. That assumes that the resources already exist somewhere, right? And you're just moving them to a new cluster, copying them over. So I think it'd be slightly different because the difficulty of adopting a cluster that wasn't built with the cluster API is that there are no like resources definitions out there to define what that cluster looks like. So you have to inspect the state of the cluster and then backwards like reverse engineer build the CRDs. And so I think that's the difficulty. And the way I see it, it could probably work with like a new cluster cuddle command. So it's not like provider specific, but there would need to be like provider aware environment. So you need to say like, this is an infrastructure Azure cluster. And then you'd have to do like cluster cuddle adopt and then pass in the credentials of that cluster so we can access it. And then sort of like reverse engineer what the cluster looks like into resource definitions.
Yeah, I could see that fitting into like the, I forget if it's done now or if it's still in progress, but the AKS cluster in the CAPZ.
You mean the work in progress
Yeah.
provider? Yeah.
I could see if you just like avoided the kind of create side of that, just kind of loading in things instead. But yeah, as Stephen said, I think this is a discussion for the CAPI forum.
With Cecile, with cluster cuddle and knit, do we assume anything about like the provider? Like, could I run cluster cuddle and knit on like
Yes.
like a cluster that's not in Azure, for example? And
yeah.
Like,
it just needs to be a Kubernetes cluster that's running 116 plus because that's CRTV1. But
yeah.
Otherwise, like any Kubernetes cluster, you just need to pass in the kubeconfig. So it could be, and you could init an AWS cluster, like an EKS cluster, and then use that as your management cluster to build Azure clusters.
Yeah. So I guess like creating, doing that process for management clusters is way easier than doing it for a workload cluster.
So there's two different things, which installs this like the CRDs and the controllers and makes it like enabled to provision workload clusters, but doesn't do any like actual provisioning of infrastructure. And then there is like move or like config cluster and apply, which actually creates like custom resources, and then those get translated into like Azure or any infrastructure provision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess my question was, that's the same process for also, like if we wanted to do that same process for a workload cluster, because you were talking about reverse engineering it for a workload cluster, and I'm trying to understand where that was coming from.
You have an existing cluster in the wild that knows nothing about cluster API that was built with some other way, and you want that to become one of your workload clusters, not one of your management clusters.
Yeah.
Be able to manage that cluster. It's different from init because it's not about making it a management cluster. You could manage it from another cluster. It doesn't have to be managed from itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, making a management cluster is significantly easier, right? It's basically like, hey, you're a management cluster, you hold the controllers, right? As opposed to, like Cecile was saying before, you'd essentially have to introspect all of the state of that cluster to try to build a map of what it is supposed to be on the on the CAPI side, right?
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. This makes a lot of sense. Cool. All right. Anything else? I think this is definitely something we could bring up to CAPI and at least get it from a non-goal to a goal as a first step. And then kind of figure out like where we go from there. If we all can decide on, let's try and figure out what it means for just within a provider first. Maybe get some group thinking on it. But yeah, any last thoughts?
Yeah, now that Stephen is here, just want to bring your attention on the first item, Stephen, the patch release for the bug that we found. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I will look at doing that in the next few days, unless there's anything.
Yeah, I dig it. Do we want to pull in anything else? Is there anything critical?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's why I brought it up at the meeting, to see if anyone had anything that they thought should be going.
Okay. Yeah, go for it.
Alrighty. So, does anyone have anything else they want to talk about? I will move to our project board if not. Okay. Moving. Does everyone see my screen? Oh, I have all the chats and the participants here. You see it? We good? Alrighty. So let's go ahead and add some of the new cards over and figure out if we basically want to put it in the backlog or if there's something that we need to do. See that again. Okay. So ensure that standard load balancers have configurable number of front-end IPs. By Jack Francis. I'm assuming that's going to go in the backlog.
Yeah, I think by default we just move new things to the backlog.
Yeah, we can do that. I don't know if there's anything. Enable flavor creation.
Progress. It's a PR.
Oh, okay. Let me move that. Cool. Alrighty. I want to go through the in progress stuff just to make sure we're still accurate. So enhancement proposal breakout resource, cloud resource reconciliation, the proposal. So David's still good on keeping that in progress for now. Cool. Enable easier flavor creation. It's a PR, so we'll just keep that there. Iterate on conformance, we'll keep that there. Okay, everything's PR. Control plane MSG is open to the internet.
There's a PR open for that one. It's right below, and
Here.
on hold because we weren't. I think Javier opened that PR and he's here actually. But I think Steven was going to take a look at it.
Yeah, that's on my list for next week.
Okay. Cool. We'll keep it in progress then. Implement Azure Machine Flows, VMS, VMSS for doing that. Diagnostic script for log collection. Not sure if we're doing that.
There's a PR open.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. You can just look down here. And then use Azure Management Identities to authenticate. I don't think we've started this.
Yeah, we did. That's the update from that
that Nader had. Oh, gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, Nader and David paired on like discussing how this should work, and
Perfect.
they have a talk out there if anyone wants to look at that. And I think we get started with the implementation.
Makes sense. Awesome.
Yeah, I still need to finish up that doc. It was a good session. Need to get the artifacts down. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. All right, we can keep that in progress. Is there anything else that we should move? I'm doing it kind of quickly today because I don't know if, I think we're pretty up to date.
Yeah, I don't think, I think we're pretty up to date since the last grooming. I think we just needed one good one to get us on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that anyone's in here working on that isn't on the board or isn't being tracked?
And a corollary to that, if you have something that you're working on or want to work on that isn't on the board or being tracked, file an issue for it or file a PR for it. At least get the draft up so we know that it's a work in progress.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Oh, we have one PR here.
That's an old PR that got closed for V1 after 1.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just showing the links. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, it looks good. Anyone have anything else? I think we're gonna end early today for the first time.
So did we want to talk about Bastion?
We could. It'd be better if Carlos was here though, because he's working.
Oh, right. Okay, cool.
But we could record it and put notes if anyone has strong opinions. Or I think asynchronous would be the best way to discuss.
Yeah, so I saw he was assigned. Did he already start working on it?
I don't know if he actually
Or
started.
maybe it was assigned. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Okay,
assigned,
alright.
but it doesn't seem like there's anything from him.
Okay. So yeah, let's pull him for updates.
Remove.
Yeah, this was 3 days ago, so it's pretty recent. He just expressed his interest to work on it to me, and I just assigned him the issue, so no one else works on
Okay.
it.
Cool.
Sounds good. Alrighty. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you have a relaxing weekend.
Later, y'all.
Yeah. See you guys in 2 weeks.
For your allergies. Hope you feel better.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will. Soon. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Later, everybody. Thanks.